Dalším hostem investičního fóra je Ashish Bhardwaj, portfoliomanažer Fidelity International, konkrétně Global Industrial Funds. Ashish, great to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Let's look at your cup of tea, if you will, meaning industrials. At the moment, very interesting stuff happening, one might say, all around the world, and there are different themes. Let's tackle them one by one. The first, the sort of a renaissance of industries or industrials in the US. Let's start with the US. Current administration is doing quite a lot in this sense. President-elect Trump is expected to do even more. What does it mean for the investor? How to play it? Where are the opportunities connected?
Yeah, so US reshoring, reindustrialization trend is just starting. And what does it mean for investors? This means that the fixed asset investment growth in the US over next many years will be much higher than what we have seen in a period of low growth from 2005 till 2020. There are some calculation which shows that it is already kind of on a path to double the growth rate from, let's say, 2.5% to 5%, because that's the rate we need to reach for the US to gain back its manufacturing market share. So for investors, it is important to gain exposure to companies which benefit from this trend of reindustrialization, onshoring, and higher fixed asset investment growth in the US, because it is not a short-term trend. It will be a long term, it will take 10 to 20 years.
Where, in which sector in particular, do you see the biggest opportunities? Do you expect the tech sector and related sectors to be sort of at the core of this trend?
I believe without technology, it will be very hard to achieve this goal of reindustrialization, reshoring. So the sectors which I find very interesting and fascinating, which play at the cross-section of technology and industrials. For example, factory automation, because you cannot set up these factories in the US at the same time not have population growth like 1% plus, because then you don't have enough people actually. You need to automate these factories. There is huge scope for increased higher usage of software in industrial, huge scope for increase of sensors and detectors and other things. I think that's a very exciting field. Another exciting field where the fund is exposed to is anything which is more geared toward US domestic activities. When you are setting up factories, you are building new ports, roads, and bridges, you need to connect these things. And you need higher demand for freight transport. So that's a sector which I find very interesting because they're domestically exposed.
Give me an example of a particular company that you see that maybe the market doesn't see yet. As an opportunity, meaning it's undervalued, and you bet on it because there is a growth potential. You can sell it.
Yeah, so let's start with the companies which play at the intersection of technology and industrials. Teledyne. So what Teledyne does, Teledyne makes sensors. They make sensors to detect lights. For example, you are setting up a factory automation line and you need to find out whether the products you are making, they are of good quality or not. For that, you need cameras and sensors. So Teledyne makes that. And Teledyne, I feel, is very attractively valued stock because right now in the US, over last 2 years, we are going through a short-term industrial cyclical downturn. And market is not willing to look through this industrial down cycle, but you look beyond this cycle, focus on the long term. There is high growth opportunity. Companies' products are high quality. There is high barrier to entry, and the valuation is not pricing in that thing. Another simple example in freight transport, I will give you an example, a company called CSX. So it's a freight rail company in the eastern part of the US. And it's a good industry structure, duopoly, because you have got only 2 rails in the east of the US. And they have got pricing power on a longer term basis. Short term, it can change. And if you are setting up a car factory in, let's say, Georgia, Hyundai, who will carry stuffs out of this factory and take it to the dealership? These rails will have to do that. And they are seeing a lot of these new projects, while the stock is not pricing in these opportunities, again, because of the industrial down cycle I was talking about. People are not willing to look through that. So there are many such opportunities to invest in companies benefiting from long-term drivers, but at attractive valuation.
That's the US. Part of the story is protectionism, let's face it. what does it mean for the rest of the world? Let's start with Europe. We are in Europe, and of course, the late news are not very encouraging. For instance, in Germany, ThyssenKrupp announced 40% of its workforce is going to be cut. That's 11,000 people. Volkswagen and other auto suppliers announced similar cuts going into the thousands, or in aggregate tens of thousands of jobs lost just in Germany and connected economies. Is it sort of a toll that rings to the European industry or the major industries such as automotive, or a start of an interesting trend, sort of a regeneration that again would be interesting for an investor as well?
Yeah. So Europe is very interesting because generally the market sentiment towards Europe is very negative because of all the things we talked about. And there are reasons to be negative, right? Let's think about the problems. First, we had energy shock, which resulted in higher energy prices. A lot of these marginal chemical steel plants, they were not profitable. The production level went down. And then we have this problem from auto. They are both cyclical and a structural problem. Cyclical because of higher interest rate, the demand has flatlined. The structural problems are this technology change. A change from internal combustion engine to electric car, where the competitive dynamics is different. China has invested a lot in electric cars, and there are many Chinese companies which are leaders in this field. So how do European auto companies compete in this new dynamic? So these are the structural drivers where that's why market feels very negative. And there are short-term drivers because of the tariff concerns and other things. But therein lies the opportunity also. And the opportunities are like this. European companies, first of all, are global companies. Their businesses are not only in Europe. They have a lot of facilities in US, they have a lot of facilities in other attractive emerging markets. So to look at European company and become negative is not appropriate because their geographical exposure in many cases could be similar like an American company. They're global companies. And if the stock has underperformed just because they are a European company, it becomes interesting because your business has not really been impacted, right? So that's number one. A lot of these European companies, they are high quality companies, good management teams, they have global exposures, and they look quite attractively valued. On the other side, about the structural problems which we talked about, energy shocks and then auto problem, obviously it's a time for regeneration because it's not like German companies cannot compete, right? Because they can catch up in technology, or they can invest, because eventually we will move beyond electric cars to automotion, like more autonomous cars and other things. So there is opportunity beyond electric cars, and if the companies and the management teams focus on long term and look through these short term problems, I believe there are a lot of companies in Europe which can take advantage of the new technologies in automotive. Yes, there was a headwind from electric car, but that is not the end game. That there will be next one about autonomous cars and other things. So there is opportunity. The point is whether the management teams will be proactive enough to take advantage of that. In some cases they are. The fund is invested in a company called Daimler Trucks. So Daimler Truck makes trucks. They have a very big business in the US. And if ever we have autonomous trucks on US street, there will be Daimler Trucks there because they have invested in autonomous trucking companies and they will have technology to do that. So I'm pretty sure they will be one of the winners in the future technology wave in the truck industry. So they are good companies.
Let's focus on China, but it's of course not just the Chinese story that needs to be mentioned in this context. Does it make sense at the moment, given of course all the variables, including valuations, to play Chinese industrials, or is it better to wait and see how the tariff story is going to unfold and so on and so forth?
Yeah. So let's talk about geopolitics, tariff and China. So geopolitical issues, as we talked about in the beginning, conceptually, the trend towards a reconfiguration of supply chain is obvious. It has started, and a lot of it is because of geopolitical and national security reasons. So obviously, geopolitics is going to be important. The world is not like the way it was from 1990 till 2020. It's a different world. And we are already seeing the companies, when they plan for the future, they're trying to rebalance their asset more balanced globally, local for local, and so on, different kind of strategies they have. Geopolitics is important, and we need to keep that in mind whenever we are investing in a company. Let's talk about tariff. Now, tariff, first of all, we don't know what will be the magnitude of impact, but from our experience last time, tariffs make investment in the short term very volatile because no one can plan for it, and once it comes, when you plan, it takes you 2-3 years to implement. It's not so easy to kind of manage the impact of tariff on your profitability. So tariffs in the short term, we need to be very, very cautious. But the factor going back to what downside is priced in the stock and all that, we have to consider that. But tariff can introduce additional volatility over the next few years. That is there. China, whether to invest in China, first of all, we should never rule out anything, right? And we need to keep learning about it. There are a lot of good companies in China also, and at right valuation point, they can be interesting. But then we have to see, what's the corporate governance structure, what kind of products do they make, how resilient they will be to different kind of political setup and so on. And if they pass all those hurdles, all those criteria, they can be fine for investment. So yes, it's never good to rule out anything, and we have to analyze each opportunity based on fundamentals, and if they're resilient enough, they can be good.
So we've talked about a couple of factors that will somehow redefine what industrial production industries were all about, more or less, in certain aspects such as AI revolutionary. What should or how should investors read this very segment? What to expect from it, how to play it, how to think of it when thinking of investment strategy from now on?
Yeah. So there are two things to keep in mind. One is cyclical and one is structural. So industrial is generally a cyclical sector. So think about where we are in the cycle. And right now, global manufacturing PMI has been below 50 for a long time, more than 1.5 years. So that is telling you we are in a down cycle. And every down cycle at some point ends. We never know the timing, but at some point it ends. So it's never a bad idea to invest in a sector which is going through a down cycle. So that is the cyclical setup. And then a structural setup, the key structural drivers, as we were talking about, is supply chain reconfiguration, US reindustrialization. One of the things which we did not talk about was electrification, because electricity demand growth has been zero, roughly flat over 20 years. But now people are expecting it to grow 2% plus because of decarbonization need, because of reshoring, because of increased demand for AI-related data centers and so on. And that will require investment in electricity generation, electricity transmission and distribution. So in the long term, those are the drivers we should keep in mind. And these drivers are telling us that in the future, the growth of this sector, a strong case could be made, is probably going to be higher than what we have seen from 2010 to 20. So we are entering a decade of a different growth rate, and there are stocks in the sectors which are not pricing in that. So that's the two lenses we should combine: cyclical, structural, and then third, combine that with right stock picking.
Říká Ashish Bhardwaj, Fidelity International. Ashish, very interesting indeed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having good conversation. Thank you for inviting me.